Hello, my fellow friend. Today, I take a very small portion of your day to teach you about economics. I will be teaching you about the consumer choices of leisure time. When looking at consumer choices, you must think of the budget constraint lines and utility. Budget constraint lines, as shown right here, show what they can afford and the choices they make between them. Budget constraint lines can be between things like bus tickets and hamburgers, protein shakes and melatonin, or for our example, it would become income for hours worked and hours of leisure. When you choose things on the budget constraint line, you must give up something else. So, for example, if you have $10 and you are to buy 10 items, you must choose between, let's say, the protein shakes and melatonin. If you buy an extra melatonin, you must give up an excess protein shake. And you make these decisions through utility. Utility is the satisfaction you receive from purchasing a certain, well, not purchasing. You can't say purchasing a single unit item like melatonin. It can also, for our example, it could be for an hour of leisure time. Utility can be obtained through leisure time, as I said, because it's the time spent not working. You get to relax, do the things you want to do. The problem with leisure time is that it has an effect on time you have working and affects how much money you make. So the budget constraint line of leisure time shows how many hours you would work for each level of income. Let's say, for example, Brian was paid $400 a week for 40 hours. If the max hours he could work were 80, this would mean that he spent 40 hours working, 40 hours for leisure. If he were to work more hours, then he would make more money. This comes down to personal preference. Does Brian want more utility from making more money or from leisure? The graph would also be determined by wages paid. The higher the wages, the steeper the graph. The lower the wages, the flatter the graph. Another thing to look at for the graph is diminishing utility, marginal utility. Marginal utility is the additional utility gained by providing an extra unit, or for our case, extra hour of leisure time. This means that the first hour Brian got from leisure would give him more utility than the 40th hour that he's gotten for leisure. Alright, now, over here, when looking at the supply curve of labor, you notice that it is backwards bending. If wages increase, you would think that the hours would increase too. This is true, but not completely. Let's go back to Brian, who is working for $10 an hour. He works for 40 hours. Now, let's go to the first part of the graph, where wages are lower. As you can see here, if he were to work more hours, his wages would go up. If he were to work less hours, they would go down. Let's say he works minimum wage. That means he's going to have, let's say, 30 hours to work instead of $10 an hour for 40. This would mean that he would have more time for leisure and less money to spend on other things that might be able to purchase utility. Now, for part 2 of the graph, you can see as wages increase, the number of hours doesn't increase much. Let's say you're working, this is true because if you're working a professional job like dentist or sales, you could be making $60, $80, or even $100,000 a year. But the job you would work would have set hours. If you were paid a little more, a little less, then you wouldn't change the number of hours you work too significantly. And finally, for the third part of the graph, you will see that higher wages tend to lead to less hours worked. You might ask yourselves, well, if I'm working if I'm making $10,000 an hour, wouldn't I want to work as much as possible to make bank? What you'd fail to see is you wouldn't need much more money anymore. What this means is you would already gain utility through buying things with all your money, but you wouldn't be maximizing your utility for leisure. Plus, if you're making $10,000 an hour or $1 million an hour, there's really no point to working anymore because you basically have all the money you need if you work. So you would want to spend more time for leisure so you can enjoy your money. I hope you've learned a lot about the labor-leisure choices for economics, and goodbye.